This is the strategy you need to find out if your idea is truly novel worthy. But let me just say, if you have to ask, it isn't. And I'm not trying to be negative or break your spirit. I just don't want to see you do the same thing I did, which is grind away at the same novel for years only to realize the idea wasn't ready for prime time. So before you go any further, let's make sure your novel idea has these 8 key storytelling elements in place. Number 1, and this is going to sound obvious, you need a main character. Maybe it's just because so many people are working with AI these days on brainstorming prompts, but I find that most novel ideas seem to sound a little bit like this. An enormous killer shark terrorizes a small island community right as they're about to celebrate the 4th of July. Now, that's a great starting point for a novel. It's a good premise, if you will, but it's not a story. It's an event. The thing that made this into a best-selling novel and ultimately got Steven Spielberg to turn it into a blockbuster movie was Peter Benchley's main character, Chief Martin Brody. Because the story here isn't about the shark, it's about how Brody deals with the shark. If Brody just shrugged his shoulders and decided to go on with his day, well, that would be it. End of story. Nothing to see here. The story is really about Brody. So what you're going to need are some of the obvious. For example, you need those primary characteristics: name, height, weight, eye color, the basics. And then there are the demographics: gender, age, race, ethnicity, etc. All of these things alone can affect how the character handles the situations you throw at them, right? If Chief Brody were deaf, for example, that would completely change the trajectory of the novel. It would materially change the outcome of Jaws. So these details are really important. You also want to have a really clear picture of this person in your mind, their voice, their mannerisms. Remember, if they don't feel real to you, they won't feel real to your audience. I see a lot of writers abandon their novels early because they get bored or annoyed, and they can't always tell me why. Often it turns out that they didn't like their main character, or at a minimum, empathize with them. And you have to ask yourself, are you prepared to spend a lot of time with your main character? Because writing a novel is a very time-consuming endeavor. But even if you have a really clear picture of this person in your mind and then they feel really super real and you're super excited about spending a lot of time with them, that isn't enough. Number 2, your main character needs a clear external goal. What does that mean exactly? Well, they need something that they're going to have to accomplish or want to accomplish by the end of the book. Ideally, something that they can't have or something that is very difficult for them to get. If the main character spends the entire novel kind of conflicted or unsure of what it is they're doing or where they're going, chances are good you don't know what they're doing or where they're going, and neither will your audience. And that is a surefire way to get bored or stuck. The more clear the main character's goal is, the better. So we've got Chief Brody, and his goal is to protect his community, right? He wants to prevent any additional injuries or deaths. He wants to save the town. He's a really likable, relatable hero. We can see ourselves in his shoes. He's just a good guy who wants to do good things. Creating a really likable character with a really likable goal that you want to see them accomplish is a really good way to stay motivated throughout the writing of the novel. Now, some stories, this is all they have: a character on a very clear external journey to reach a goal. But the best, most interesting characters have more than that. Number 3, your main character also needs an internal goal or motivation. Characters are people. They don't just act, they think. Now, this level of depth is left out of the film, but in the novel version, Brody's character is dealing with a really bored wife who has this very affluent background, and she ends up with a wandering eye, which makes him very insecure. So he doesn't just want to save his community, he wants to save his marriage. He wants to save his dignity. But let's go on a side quest. You might be saying, Christian, what if I want to create an anti-hero? Okay, so there are a couple ways to do this. You shouldn't be afraid to play around with unlikable characters or morally questionable goals, but it is best if you only go with one or the other. So I'll give you an example. Lisbeth Salander from The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, she's this antisocial hacker, right, with a violent background. So she's not exactly likable, but her motivation is, and spoiler alert here, vengeance against her rapist, which is a righteous, even if flawed, mission, which makes her a really compelling character. Then you have something like, say, Andy Dufresne's character from Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption. Like, we don't know if he actually murdered his wife and her lover in cold blood. He may or may not be innocent, but he's such a good, likable guy in prison, and his captors are really cruel. So we take his side even before we learn the truth. These kinds of internal complexities can make the difference between a novel that's a slog to write and one that flows super smoothly. But I swear by another essential element that helps me coast through my first draft, and that is number 4. Our main character needs at least one weird quirk. This is where Jaws gets it so right. Brody has this really intense fear of water. Now, in the book, he actually does know how to swim. He's a bad swimmer, but he knows how to swim. But he's got all of this trauma and tension wrapped up around his childhood memories. In the movie, they really play up his fear as a true phobia, and it causes him intense anxiety. Either way, the quirk interferes with his goals. It makes him interesting, and it also adds tension. In my debut novel, Jude's Diary, my main character, Alyssa Pike, is an anti-heroine. She's rich, she's successful at everything, and she's insufferably egotistical. But she also suffers from misophonia, which is an intense psychological intolerance to certain sounds like smacking or chewing. It's basically the kryptonite that makes her human. It gives her a little vulnerability so that the audience doesn't completely hate her. And frankly, when I was writing her, neither did I. In other words, for those of you writing anti-heroes, the quirk could be your main character's only endearing trait. Or it could be their downfall, which brings us to the next set of elements that we need. Numbers 5, 6, and 7. Your main character needs at least 3 obstacles that stand between them and their goal. Now, 3 is a good minimum. Most novels have more than that, but 3 at least gets you started. Jaws has many more, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to call out the 3 main ones. So 1, you have this corrupt mayor, right? He won't let Chief Brody close the beaches. You have a town council. They refuse to fund professional hunting the shark. And then you have a feud between 2 men. In the book, it's between Hooper and Chief Brody because Hooper is the one having an affair with his wife. In the movie, it's between Hooper and Quint. These obstacles are usually where most writers get stuck, especially if you start writing without knowing what those obstacles are going to be. This is one of those times I like to break out my Post-it notes and get brainstorming. And even Peter Benchley's novel drags at points. There are all these boring town council meetings and research paper-like passages about shark biology. It doesn't really up the stakes, it just stretches it all out. Especially if you're writing suspense, horror, thrillers, or mystery, every subsequent obstacle should raise the stakes. You might have increasingly risky crime that the main character is participating in. You might have violence that increases in intensity as the novel moves forward. Or like in Jaws, you might have a rising body count as we go. If you're writing literary fiction, historical drama, romance, those kinds of genres, these obstacles might come from perfectly avoidable miscommunications between characters, competition between friends or lovers, or good old-fashioned family drama. In order to keep increasing that tension, you want it so that the main character, every time they hit an obstacle, they think they've defeated it, only to have another one pop up. At some point, after so many obstacles, they realize that all of their attempts have been feeble and they still haven't reached their goal, which brings us to our last element. Number 8. Your main character needs an explosive final confrontation. Now, at a minimum, before I start writing, I have a main character with a goal, and I know whether or not they are going to meet that goal. If I don't have that in place before I get started, my chances of getting stuck, bored, or I can't figure out how to resolve it are almost 100%. With Jaws, we've got this guy. He's likable. We like his goals. I mean, let's be real, right? We know he's probably going to reach those goals. We just don't know how. And that's okay, because really we're just along for the ride. I hear a lot of writers say that they don't know how to end their novel and they don't want to know. They're afraid they'll get bored and they won't have any incentive or motivation to finish writing their novel if they know how it ends. But the truth is, it actually goes so much faster and easier when you know how it's going to end. In fact, I would go as far as to say that you need to be able to picture how that novel is going to end. You need to be able to see it clearly in your mind playing out like a movie. The more you can see the movie version in your head, the more likely you are to be able to explain it to the reader in a way that they can see it too. Now, in Peter Benchley's book, please don't come at me for this, but the ending is not quite as exciting as it is in the movie. But in both cases, Brody not only defeats the shark and defeats his insecurity, he overcomes his one weird quirk. All 3 things resolve simultaneously, which makes it a satisfying ending. Now, if you can see the end and you can see all the obstacles and it's like a movie in your mind and you still get bored or want to abandon your novel, please go back to the part where I say, you're going to have to want to spend a lot of time with this person in this world. When I wrote my debut novel, I wrote an anti-heroine in part because she was so foreign to me. Her personality, her motivations, her quirks. I admired her tenacity and her confidence, but I didn't actually empathize with her. So what drove me to keep writing her story was wanting to understand her. That's what kept her from being boring. And that's what kept me from being bored when I was writing the book. So if you don't think that this is the core reason why you've lost your motivation to write, grab your free downloadable workbook at the link in the description. There are a bunch of super helpful exercises in there that will help you figure out how to get your mojo back and get unstuck so you can finally finish writing the novel of your dreams. One last thing, quick disclaimer. Of course, there are examples of novels that have bucked this advice, and that's fair. There's an exception to every rule. But if you're stuck or struggling with your novel and you can't figure out what to do next, this framework is a great place place to start. It's helped me numerous times. That said, if you have a different method that has consistently worked for you, please drop a comment and let us know more about it. I hope you found something valuable in this video and that you subscribe. And until next time, happy writing.